Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our second meeting for the course in uh, Current Trends in Development Policy. Um, you have seen a lot of updates already in Moodle. Most of the references and reading materials, links to it, videos, websites are all in Moodle. Maybe you have already seen the working groups. There are changes that have happened because there were a couple of withdrawals from exchange students and non-DECO majors, but we've got new ones. I can see that has everybody introduced? Vera is here. Vera Lade. So she's joining us and she will be part of the education group. So Vera, can you please introduce yourself to the class and mention something also about your expectations?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I started the development and international cooperation studies several years ago, and then kind of life happened, and now I'm planning to get a degree this spring. This is the only course that I'm missing still, and I'm finishing my thesis as well. It's about uh, climate resilience of rural Indian communities. Um, well, and I'm expecting to kind of get my knowledge about development studies back to back to like a today topics. It's been 3-4 years that I've been doing a lot of other things, not so much related to development, and I think this is a great reminder for me what the development is all about.
Yes, Vera, welcome back. I hope you get back also to the academic atmosphere.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yes,
Okay, in a new, different virtual setting nowadays, different from what you had during your time. Okay, do you have any questions from last meeting or any administrative concerns at the moment? Because we'll be having a long discussion. But please, as I can see it, some of you have been checking the Moodle from frequently, and that is good because you get the updates there. Um, okay, no questions. Thank you again for those who have tweeted their questions and takeaways. I have read them. I won't be able to answer each one of them, but I've realized that um, many, if not most of those concerns will be addressed today. And some of the issues are actually discussed uh, in the days ahead in our different sessions, including the last lecture session that I would have on private sector development. I have read your questions and thank you for the takeaways. Please continue the dialogue and the discussion there. You can also comment on one another's feedback there. You can do that in Google Docs. For today, we'll be talking about, can you see the slide now? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. The title of this session is A Brief History of Development Theories and Policies. Again, as I said to you, you can interrupt me anytime. I cannot see any video on at the moment, so it's difficult for me to figure out if you have a question. The usual thing you would do is to raise your hand virtually. But as I mentioned last time, you can interrupt me anytime. Um, if you think that I'm not acknowledging you, just switch on your mic and then say something. Okay, clear. Most of you, especially the DACO majors, have already had a course in development theories. Yeah, you called it the classics in development theory. Some of the topics that we would cover today are just review of what you have already learned. Again, bear in mind that the participants of this course are not all DACO majors. Um, Now, you are seeing here my lecture notes, and I would like to emphasize that these are mostly my notes, meaning that they are wordy. You can see a lot of words in here. You can see a lot of images. And what I would like to do here, what was my plan is for this document to be part of your reading. Um, this is also based on experience that students have been using my lecture notes quite often, and it's always difficult if students would have that kind of attitude, because slides do not tell you everything. But I tried my best here to arrange the slides in such a way that it would be an aid for your learning. So it's not really a visual slide, where we are taught that we should only have a few images and a few words. I'm not doing that because this is not really a slide presentation. This is more of a lecture note. Um, Here, we will cover a lot of books, references, theories, and concepts. I would highlight many of them and the key ideas. Um, we wouldn't have time to discuss them in detail, but as I said, the lecture sessions that we had would just be uh, a general discussion and presentation of the topics. The more detailed studies would be done by yourself through your readings and discussion. And also, if you would like to ask questions with me, even after the classroom hours, I'm here also to answer them. Um, okay. I have set out 5 learning agenda and objectives for this session. Um, this is also based on the questions that I got in this Q&T tweets that you answered. Um, and as I said to you, it's very important for me and for our future guest lecturers for you to fill out as early as possible the list of questions that you have for particular topics, so that we could also prepare um, for our presentation what needs to be emphasized and what issues should be clarified. Okay. The first agenda is for you to have an appreciation of the link between theory and policy. Um, you know, ideas and philosophies are the ones that underpin development studies and practice. Um, Secondly, we would also try to meet the objective for you to be aware of how knowledge is produced in development. There's this phenomenon and a tendency towards what we call Eurocentrism in our worldview, in the way we view things. The centrality of Europe. Um, and then uh, in this knowledge production endeavor, there are also movements that are critiquing the Eurocentric worldview. Uh, these are movements that call for the decolonization of knowledge or the diversification of development epistemology. The third learning agenda that we have is to have a review of the classic development question on the wealth and poverty of nations. There are three subsections in there. Uh, One, we will have to think about the concept and measure of value. Uh, and two, we will have a discussion on the classic debate between modernization theory and dependency school, which you should have already uh, uh, learned from your classics of development course. And this is also the theme of the required reading references that were available in Moodle. And three, we would have a survey of the theorists and their arguments of why some countries are rich and the others poor. The fourth learning agenda uh, is to present to you some of the enduring structure of North-South development relations. In particular here, um, there were some suggestions from many of your classmates to also present how these development theories are actualized in practice. Uh, so that section we would deal with that and try to present all these concrete realities of the theories that we would be discussing. And lastly, um, we would have a reflection on so-called alternatives to development and the process of socioeconomic and political change. Many of you have already heard concepts and issues called like post-development. Some of the examples of that are called reclaiming the commons, pluriverse, degrowth, buen vivir, and all those stuff. And sounds familiar to many of you, I suppose. Now, the theory policy nexus. For instance, Dimitri wrote in his question about, yeah, you already learned about development theory and you would now like to understand more about policy. And indeed, this course is about policy. Um, I would like to draw your attention to this quote from one of the best economic theorists and thinkers in the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes. Um, uh, please read this one and then tell me your reflection on this. We can have a discussion on the sense that you get from his message. Anyone? So how do you interpret this statement, a concluding note from John Maynard Keynes?
Um, well,
Yes,
I guess
Daniela.
I'll say something. Yeah. Um, I think he's saying that there are no big forces that rule politics or economics, but it's the people that are in charge that are making the decisions, and I guess the political force also moves with attitudes, or common attitudes, and so we have a big role as people, and how our attitudes are changed, and it does affect.
Have you been, as someone who's been studying in the university, have you been accused that, Daniela, you're very theoretical? Yeah.
Uh,
It does not
well,
apply into practice. What is your major again?
political science.
Yeah, in political science,
Well,
that's just
yes,
in theory, Daniela. It doesn't apply in real works and politicians in real governance issues.
I guess, but I'm also I'm aware of the fact that they don't apply perfectly the same way. Like, perfect theory is never the same when it's applied in something else, because we can't really see all the um, things that are going to change, or all the can't get the English word in my mind, but I I guess that's why I'm also really careful about commenting on a lot of things, because I know I have the theory to maybe say something, but a theory is not a fact. It's only a theory until proven wrong or other.
But what they are not realizing, those criticizing you, is that even their own opinions about politics, the economy, about development, they come from particular theories and ideas already that have been written by many philosophers and thinkers in the past. And
Mm,
this is what makes us in the academia, those in the university, um, different from, we can say, layperson, because
mm,
we have a training on theory. We
mm,
also use concepts. We have our own vocabulary in the academia. There
mm,
are some phenomena or activities happening around. Uh, they don't know how it's called, but in the academia, we are trained how that one is called. It's just
mm,
like, in driving, you know how to drive, but there are terminologies and concepts in that kind of activity that is so automatic to you. Um, so even those opinions who accuse us of being so theoretical and academic, they are not realizing their own opinions have already been written by some
mm,
dead defunct economists and philosophers in the past. And this is also what John Maynard Keynes is telling us, that like practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. So he even said that it is ideas, not vested interests, which are dangerous for good or evil. I mean, politicians come and go. Politicians are fleeting, but ideas will stay. Um, in the movie V for Vendetta, it says that ideas are bulletproof. You can only kill an idea with another or better or powerful or more powerful idea.
mm,
Um, so so the same thing with development policy. A lot of policies that we see now that have been designed in parliament or by some researchers or some specialists, they already they there are theories and ideas and philosophies that underpin them.
mm.
Um,
I think a good example might be democracy. Democracy has been around for like thousands of years, but it changed on the way, and it got forgotten, and then it got taken
yeah,
back in. And I think democracy is changing all the time as well. If we look at the U.S. right now, and
yeah,
well, it's yeah.
yeah. So even those, they say here in year 2021, they say the bureaucracy has changed, the government has changed, the world has changed. As Keynes would mention here, the ideas which civil servants and politicians and even agitators apply to current events are not likely to be the newest. Um, and later on, you will see a lot of these development ideas that are still being used. Those who who theorize about development right now, they have a footnote, and those footnotes actually come from classic development theories. It's clear to you now about the link between theory and policy. Now, moving on to the second agenda that we have, you know, how is knowledge produced in development? Um, as I mentioned last time, in critical theory, it says that the theory is always for someone and for some purpose. So we should know how and why a particular development theory is used and produced. Um, Now you see this slide, the moment. Um, it says that we, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and what we saw, like in the United States, in UK, all over the world, but particularly in the heart of the most development industrial capitalist centers, specifically the United States and Europe. Um, what we are seeing right now are all these social conflicts happening. Um, you see in this screen the Black Lives Matter movement, uh, which has actually shaken the world, particularly the mainstream media. Um, i- um, we are saying that at the moment we are in a period of historical reckoning. It is a day of reckoning about reviewing the past, if not making uh, the guilty groups pay for past mistakes, to reflect upon changes that should be happening about how the world is, how the world was, how development was done and enforced, um, and a whole lot of these historical processes and issues that we are confronting right now. Um, are we in a day of reckoning at the moment? Which is very important because, as the American novelist George Orwell in 1984 uh, novel, he wrote that who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. As it is said, Churchill is also known for saying that history is written by victors. Um, so, can I hear some um, opinions here or insights about the Black Lives Matter movement? What is your impression or any opinion that you have as it relates to how do we know the world, and how we should know the world?
Hey, can I say something?
Yes, Dimitri.
Um, Not exactly from the classics of development theories, but I was fortunate enough to complete a course in political conflicts, and we have studied North Korea and US propaganda. So it's kind of also opened the eyes a lot on US, like forgetting the past and talking only about the present and not actually talking about the wars of the previous century. So yes, it's true. So who control the present, they control the past. It's completely true. Thank you.
There's this statement, thanks Dimitri, that who controls at the moment. Of course, the most powerful country at the moment is the United States. And of course, the United States was a product of the European civilization. I mean, England. Um, as what we hear right now, um, there's a new concept called like the fake news, and there's a belief in our argument that history itself is fake news. So all these are being questioned at the moment. Of course, in this slide, you can also see like a placard here that say Black Lives Matter and white supremacy now. For instance, this is an argument that also sees history from the point of view of white people. Um, and and then there's the placard here that says Black lives have always mattered. Yeah, of course, the black there also entails not just literal but also a metaphorical statement to also include all people of color. Yeah, um, a lot of development history and ideas have actually been written by white, European, and particularly male uh, thinkers and scholars. Um, you see here in this movement, like for instance, here what happened in Bristol in the UK. So they fell down the statue of Colton, who was a slave trader, and that's a way of questioning why are you celebrating or through symbols and statues in the colonizers, those who celebrate slavery. Aren't we supposed to be condemning them? Um, and in the universities, we've been seeing also calls like this one on this is a campaign of students who are like you, maybe some of them studying development. That was in the University of Amsterdam. So they even say, don't just diversify, decolonize. Diversify usually relates to gender issues, like women and the LGBTQ community should have more representation. But they say it's not enough to diversify. We also have to decolonize. So meaning that they would like to highlight the issue of racial justice, um, and problematize, unpack, and unearth the process of colonialism and colonization. Um, in the academia, there are also people doing the colonial kind of approach to research. On the 12th of February, during the development day of the Finnish Society for Development Research, there would be many researchers there who would be speaking on decolonializing development research. So I encourage you to register in the conference. As I said to you, our class hours would be required for you to attend, but the event is whole day. The link to the conference registration is in Moodle, so do it there. Okay. Now, many of you should have heard Orientalism, and you should have also encountered that. Mainstream development studies has been framed a lot by what Edward Said called as Orientalism. For him, as many of you who are doing political science, you're also aware of Michel Foucault's knowledge and power um, um, dynamics in his understanding of discourse. So what is this Orientalism? Edward Said conceptualize it into three terms. The first is that it is the study of the Orient, particularly the East. Yeah. Secondly, he presented Orientalism as a style of thought based upon an ontological and epistemological distinction between the Orient and most of the time the Occident. So the starting point of Orientalism is a basic distinction between the East and the West. This is where you find the process called othering. Yeah. Um, so you treat a particular group of people living or inhabiting um, the other side of the world as the others, and uh, a lot of development work and studies have been framed like that historically, which we will find out how in the next discussions. Um, and thirdly, Orientalism has been viewed, and this is the kind of perspective that I would like you to remember about Orientalism. Uh, as Edward Said conceptualized it, Orientalism is a discourse with historical and material dynamics. It's a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. So it's just like, if you have the power to name someone or to name a particular um, group of people, label them, you are exercising authority over that kind of uh, over those people you um, are naming and labeling. So it's a way of um, asserting your authority over them. And those kinds of assertions historically have been done by the West, so-called, quote unquote, uh, particularly by Europe and nowadays by the United States. Um, and development studies, the mainstream um has always been defined by Orientalism. And this is related to Eurocentrism. Um, um, what are the arguments that frame Eurocentrism? Um, Basically, Eurocentrism is the view and the ideology that Europe is the model of progress, the model of dynamism, the model of modernity, and the model of enlightenment, and the rest should follow Europe. Um, and here I have listed uh, um, the characteristics and features of Eurocentrism. Um, I won't go through each one of them, uh, but my main point here is that unfortunately, a lot of development theories that you would hear in the um, forthcoming discussions are Eurocentric. Um, it's still a challenge for us to also highlight and use references uh, that have been written and said by non-white and non-European authors. Um, but as I said, we are now in this period of historical reckoning, and even universities have to decolonize and be able to check our own privileges, our own positions, um, as someone who are based in the so-called global north. The Eurocentrism believes that Europe is inherently dynamic, progressing and modernizing. That European progress um, is um, is the model for others to follow. So there is this notion of the European mind, the European spirit, the Western mind, the European values. Um, so Eurocentrism also sees that there's a lack of progress outside Europe. Um, and in fact, there is deficiency in the intellectual and spiritual capacity of those outside Europe. And doesn't that ring a bell on you, that how this kind of discourse is being amplified and articulated right now? Trump just left the presidency yesterday, and he would unashamedly claim and make these kinds of statements. And all these issues about racism, like many of you are educators, you know that there have been ideas on learning processes before that are racist, but they have been there. You know, how do, like, um, Western, quote unquote, I am using Western or European in quotes um, to qualify it, because for me, there's no such thing as the European or the Western, because there are diversity also within Europe. Um, but in the education system, the way, for instance, in the United States, how Black people or people of color are viewed, others would think of them as having like a smaller brain. If you are in Facebook or in social media, you see, like, you know there was this picture about the brain of an African kid and the brain of like a Caucasian kid. It's just the same size. And then the other picture there is the brain of the racist is like really much, much smaller. Um, but the point here is that there are these racist views about how the white privileged uh, people view um, much of these people from the global south, um, telling them to be, yeah, irrational. But ironically, um, the so-called Europe, who is promoting and espousing what we call Christianity. Christianity was born out in the Middle East as we know it, but at the same time, they view the Middle East during the biblical times to be rational. you know. But China, during the a certain period in history, and many of the uh, the um, discoveries and inventions that we have right now were actually discovered from China. And with the rise of China right now, we can see a lot of historical beliefs that we have been told in a mainstream classroom to be wrong, and for us to be for us to recall and reflect upon. Um, so Eurocentrism was also the basis for the belief that colonialism itself is not a curse, but it is a blessing. Um, So the argument is that the diffusion of European ideas and ways of doing things in non-European areas legitimizes the historical relationship of colonialism. This is what we call the white man's burden, that the white people, the so-called civilized white people, have the duty to cleanse and the uncivilized uh, people in the eastern part of the world. Um, so they were saying that that the trade-off of colonialism is actually fair, according to the Eurocentric mindset, that colonialism has given more than it has received. Yeah. And again, the assertion is that Europe's civilization is more superior than the rest, that the non-European civilization is inferior. So that's the Eurocentric kind of perspective. And this kind of view is very much alive. Now, the question is, um, where does Eurocentrism come from? Here, you can read the comics here. You say, you know, Huawei, what does Euro, whatever you said, mean, Eurocentrism? It's when you eliminate the African perspective and marginalize or omit people of color, their contributions, their experiences, etc. Understand? Not really. Do you ever watch Friends? Yes, then you understand. You know, Friends, I'm not sure most of you are millennials, but Friends was a sitcom from the United States in the 1990s. It's still being shown even here in Finland. Uh, there are lots of discussions about Friends. It's also criticized because of its um, all white casting. And of course, the other issues is the in anti-intellectualism. There is this one guy there, I think Geller, who was always making, you know, his friends have been making fun of him because he was an intellectual. And yeah. So where does Eurocentrism come from? It can be based on socialization. Yeah, the media, the school system. Dimitri mentioned about how we have been socialized also in how we view, for instance, North Korea or Russia um, or Africa, developed world. Much of our understanding and worldview has been shaped by socialization. Um, and part of the argument I've been seeing is that Eurocentrism also comes from our subconsciousness. They are not aware about their Eurocentrism. And I've been observing this also even among scholars, even critical scholars in development studies. They would criticize white privileges and white supremacy, colonialism and all, but there have been arguments and behavior coming from even the critical intellectuals that are Eurocentric. So where does it come from? It could, this is my argument, it could come from some subconscious that that you are not just realizing that you are having some Eurocentric perspective and behavior towards others. And the other major um, um, argument, where does Eurocentrism come from? And this comes from post-colonial scholars, is the argument that Eurocentrism is deliberate. You know, just like what Edward Said mentioned, it's a discursive strategy for domination. Others. Okay. Do you have questions about Eurocentrism?
I would have a comment.
Yes, Magdalena.
So I think that often Eurocentrism isn't recognized as such because throughout history it has been shaped by so many actors that people actually don't know where it comes from anymore. And an example would be, for example, in certain African countries, values such as, well, Christian values are supposed to be African values, and like homophobia, for example, is a very big issue. And it has been called out by many African presidents that being against homosexuals is actually an African value. Although initially many different systems, and this all came with the church and missionaries actually. So I think many people don't even know anymore has originally been Eurocentric often.
Yeah, thank you. And also, in addition to what Magdalena mentioned, I mean, we should be very cautious about this, uh, because the fact is, and argue this case as well, not all European ideas are bad. There are many European ideas which are good and beneficial. Um, but then, as Magdalena mentioned, the question is that where does that particular idea really come from? Does it really come from Europe? Even like democracy, is it really European? Um, and development, is it really European now? So just be very careful. But this section of the discussion that we have right now is just a reminder for you, for us who are studying in the university. We we are privileged, as you know, as you should know. So be mindful of our positionality, um, and that's it. And always guard ourselves against Eurocentrism. Um, okay. Otherwise, it is close to what they're you call like fascism. Was it Foucault who said that Foucault said that we should be uh, wary or be careful of the innate fascism in each one of us, meaning there's a tendency in each one of us to impose our own values onto others, um, and that's just a reminder for us. Okay. Now moving to the third section of this theme for today, classic development question on the wealth and poverty of nations. There is this fundamental question being asked in development, how rich countries got rich and why poor countries stay poor. You know, we ask in development how to organize relationships within and between societies, economies, um, communities, and human life itself. How will poor countries in particular and all of humanity realize a good life? Um, and the best way to understand development is through history, because history is the only laboratory that we have in development studies, in economics, in the social sciences. What we have so far, again, this is for me also Eurocentric, is at least 500 years of development history. But in my other courses in world economic history, I would tell you that the world economy has a 5,000-year history, but development studies is relatively young. So I could just frame it in the last 500 years, and some of the ideas and theories who have contributed to development ideas in the last 500 years, we will discuss them later. Um, Now, let me ask you this question. Um, let's have a discussion for now. Tell where you from originally, and say your country is rich or poor because of what. Maybe I can see Ahi. Would you like to say something? I think Ahi is from Korea.
Yes, can you
Why
repeat
is
the
Korea
question?
rich? Or it's
Oh.
up to you whether you would frame Korea rich or poor.
I think, well, to specify, I think South Korea
South Korea, okay.
is more rich or richer than North Korea. And I think mainly was because after the Korean War, South Korea was supported by the United States, and like politically and economically, and the government leaders they were following what the West was doing. Whereas North Korea, they were supported by the Soviet Union. And actually before 1990s, North Korea was far well off because Soviet Union was like really supporting them. And yeah, North Korea was richer than South Korea. But after the Soviet Union fell, the situation was changed.
Very good point. I seldom hear that actually from development studies. And when they say Korea is, why is it rich? Because they would say, they would mention the industries like and also the chaebols but the geopolitical factor, which Ahi mentioned. Very good point, Ahi. We will have a discussion on that tomorrow actually. Um, and then who else am I seeing here? Let's say Alisa. I think Alisa is from here in Finland. Why is Finland rich?
Yes, hard to say.
Even though it's cold here,
Yeah,
the
well,
climate is cold.
yeah, it is cold.
You cannot grow
But
much agricultural products here. But why is
yeah,
it rich?
the agricultural, well, there are, well, I think the main factor why Finland is rich country is because it's so industrialized country, and after the World War II, Finland was able to have like fastly grow in the industrial field, and also the education was very well organized for everyone after the 1940, I think. But yeah.
Very good answers. Industrialization and then education. Um, and then I can see the name of Wajahat. Where are you from?
Hi. Yeah, I am from Pakistan.
Yeah.
And Pakistan is considered as a middle income country. And I think why the Pakistan is not rich is because of the corruption issues, and we don't have any stable political system since the formation of Pakistan after 1947. We have 3 times martial law in our country, and whenever a democratic government comes, there is a military coup, and they have these kind of problems. And then we have also conflict, the Kashmir issue with India, and we have fought 3 wars. So all these factors are contributing to the underdevelopment of the country.
Yeah, very good point. You mentioned about corruption, conflicts, political instability, contributing to the poverty of Pakistan. Who else? Pelle, where are you from?
Yes, hello, I'm from Belgium.
Belgium. Yeah, why Belgium is rich?
Yeah, so I would consider Belgium to be quite rich when it comes to like classic economics wise. We are also like, I would also say Belgium is rich in a more sense of a rich history. We have a very long history, medieval history. And we are also at the center of Europe. So our capital, Brussels, is the capital of Europe. So we are quite important for Europe. So those make us rich. We also have quite a good healthcare system, I would say. But on the other hand, like in contrast with Finland, we are very poor when it comes to nature. We don't have anything of that. So yeah, it depends on what angle you look it from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good. Okay, there are so many statements here. Okay, I think Dimitri, I'm reading here.
Yes.
Yes, Dimitri.
Well, I'm from Russia. It's actually difficult to say on us being rich or poor. I would say that the country is rich, but the majority of people are poor. I would maybe criticize the. I mean, I would also put the corruption thing as being a big thing, and difficult to say.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, about the other things basically, but yeah, I mean, we also been doing a lot of international politics, being the USSR, and after that, it all. I mean, it all changed, and it's honestly pretty difficult to give some critique afterwards. But what I can be certain about is that we're still being we're still being stereotyped vastly. So maybe still this the ghost of communism is still chasing us, and um, well, people are talking mostly about politics, but not the people, which is sad.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Dimitri. There are interesting discussions happening in the chat room about Finland, but please read them, and then you can also write them in our Q&T. That can be your entry already in Q&T. Okay, maybe Rebecca. Some historical thing happened yesterday in the United States.
Yes, it did. So, yeah, very happy about that. I've been watching the inauguration. But as far as if the US is rich or poor, it totally depends on your definition of rich and poor. I personally would say that the United States is poor because we have severe inequality, especially when it comes to healthcare and education and accessing food and other social services. So, but yeah, of course, this depends on your opinion and who exactly you're looking at. But
yeah,
hopefully we have some change in the next 4 years.
Thanks, Rebecca. Saroj.
Yes. Hello. Yes, I'm originally from Nepal. Yeah. If I have to talk about Nepal, like given the economic condition, yeah, it is considered as a poor country, and like the reason can be like the more dependence, since it is a like landlocked country, okay, and it has no access to the like seas and oceans, and like more imports, okay, and then like more dependence of the imports on the neighboring countries like India and China. And from the side of China, it's really very difficult for the import, even like because the infrastructure for transportation that is not so good, like more dependence on India, and that is also hampering its like political sovereignty. And that is also one of the reason. And the next reason can be like the corrupt bureaucracy of the country. And the other reasons can be like it's still not growing in industrialization, okay, and then like the technological advancement of the country is also really very poor, okay, and maybe this could be like some of the very important aspects like for economic growth or the development. And yes, these are some of the reasons. But like if, yeah, of course, like Nepal has the like potentiality to development, for example, like the natural or resources. It's not like in terms of like mineral resources like African countries, okay, they are really very rich in terms of valuable natural resources. But the other kind of like tourism development prospect of Nepal is really very high. But maybe because of corruption and some other things. Maybe that is
Yeah.
still hindering the tourism development. Means like Nepal, it is still has to like, maybe while I was going through the articles like which you put in the Moodle, okay, like self-reliance means the developing countries, they have to like promote self-reliance, means they have to like reduce imports or try to become more self-reliant by creating that kind of like development aspects within the country. Okay, means maybe if Nepal does that, maybe it can become like developed in the future. But for now, it's a poor country.
Yeah, thank you for the comprehensive answer, Saroj. And I think you now have an answer to your question in the QT about the Arthur Lewis model of economic development. Okay. So all of the answers you have made and put forward, citing the different factors why a particular country is rich or poor, have been theorized already by different scholars and theories and thinkers. I won't mention right now who is the most valid or not, but the statement here is that all the factors you mentioned have already been written in theory by some old thinkers in the past, and even recently they are being mentioned. I wouldn't invalidate them. It's up to your own research and also your own reflection. Okay. As I used to teach this political economy of development. They say that the causes of the wealth and poverty of nations is the ground object of all inquiries in political economy. And I heard that some of you have already taken the course on the political economies of development. This has been a classic question, really. What is the sources of wealth? What is the sources of poverty? And the problem in development policy right now is that most policies you are seeing, including the MDGs or the SDGs, they are only touching on the symptoms of poverty, but not really the causes of poverty. And political economy has always been asking that classic question, the fundamental question. Okay. Many of you, particularly Rebecca, said that, and Dimitri also mentioned that how we define poverty or wealth depends on, determines the answer. I mean, the answer to the question depends on the definition that we have about value. What is this concept of value? Here, I would like to direct you to this book again by Mariana Mazzucato, who's a well-known Italian-American scholar based in London at the moment. So I encourage you to read that. So we have to ask the question, what's value creative? What's value extractive? What's productive? What's unproductive? For instance, in the United States, are the works of the financiers that important? Are the work of bankers very important and essential? Don't we realize during the COVID-19 pandemic who and what kind of jobs are essential and who really contribute so much value to survival into human life? But we have been, the world right now have been valuing the work of, in terms of in monetary terms, in the financial, those in the financial sector and banking and real estate. So there have been different theories in economics who also argued on different sources of value and wealth and productivity. The mercantilists in the 1600s said that trade and industry are very important. Many of you mentioned here in the debate about Finland in the chat room, I can see that you have also emphasized this point. why trade and the manufacturing sector, which Saroj also mentioned about it, is very important in making a country rich. Yeah. So the mercantilists value so much, the manufacturing sector. Um, the physiocrats, those who believe in the rule of nature in the 1700s, uh, they they value nature. Yeah, some of you mentioned about the natural resources. While, for instance, Africa, they say that Africa is a rich country of poor people. Rich in the sense that you value wealth on the basis of natural resources. But in the real capitalist world right now, natural resources not really uh, counted as valuable or a source of wealth. You have to process or innovate the raw material, natural resources, so that it would have more value. That's the real world capitalism at the moment. But the physiocrats in the 1700s sees value and wealth and productivity on land farming and agriculture. In the 1800s, the classical economists, and that includes Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Karl Marx, the German historical school, they came up with what we call the labor theory of value, that labor itself is a source of value. Right now, again, in the real world, capitalist world, the way labor is viewed is that labor is just a cost rather than a value. Yeah. And then lastly, the neoclassical economics uh, point of view, which is very dominant right now from the 1900s until now, uh, is that value is based on preferences or price, which is very subjective. I'm not sure if you've heard about the so-called paradox of value, or the paradox of water and diamond. Why is water, which is very useful and abundant, in terms of prices, not as valuable compared to the scarce diamonds? Why are diamonds and all these rare earth minerals very expensive? So in the older ages, like the medieval times, which was mentioned by, I think, Pele, how economic thinkers the medieval times were thinking about wealth and value. So before, the question was that how how do you put a price on a valuable commodity or good? That was the question before. So they prioritize first the value rather than price. Right now, in the world we're living, value is determined by the price itself. If it's expensive, it's valuable. If it's not expensive, it's not valuable. So that's the worldview we are looking at the moment. And of course, the reality is that we are within a capitalist system with a particular set of assumptions and value. Okay. So let's move to the classic debate on modernization and the doctrine for political development. This is in your reading. In modernization theory, what you should remember there is how they characterize the so-called third world or post-colonial nations. Yeah, the East, the former colonies in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. So modernization theorists look at the third world as having non-Western processes and values in their polity, in their economy, and their society. Meaning that the third world is pre-state, pre-rational, pre-industrial, pre-capitalist. In other words, they view the third world as primitive, backward nations, um, where policymaking is erratic, irrational, pervaded by private interests. Many of you already mentioned that, like when you mentioned about corruption in the third world countries, it also comes from a modernization perspective. Uh, but if you are also looking at a lot of theories right now on public administration, you would hear that even here in Finland, there's corruption. Um, in France, you know, uh, in France, bribery is part of the business practices. Um, so there are arguments in public administration that that corruption is also a question, is a cultural question. What is corruption to you, or what is corruption in policy terms? But the modernization theorists would blame the third world for all this personalistic politics, for tribalism. For instance, political parties in third world is viewed by them as being personalistic, not based on rules-based political party system. Um, so that was the characterization of modernization theory for or about the third world, and they came up with a series of suggestions to modernize them, basically to westernize the political, economic, social, and even cultural system of the third world. So there have been lots of theories right now, um, especially in the 40s and in the 60s. So the economic modernizers, you have Paul Rosenstein Rodan, you have W. Rostow, and then Arthur Lewis, who was mentioned by Saroj in his question in the tweet. And then in the United States, there was also these studies in the political development series, where they wrote, these are political scientists who should be familiar to some of you in the political science. They wrote these books about how to modernize the polity of the third world. Basically, so meaning if you mention about economic modernization, meaning it's a process towards what? Western style capitalism. If you say political modernization, it means Western style democracy, rules based, supposedly. But we have lots of questions on that. Okay. So in development, and a lot of development policies right now has been framed by modernization theory. You will realize that as we go on in our course. And modernization theory has always been pitted against the so-called dependency school. So I would like to call it the dependency school because there are so many variants within dependency. And I have put in here the different left and Marxist thinkers about studying capitalist development. So we have in the beginning the theories of capitalism and imperialism by Karl Marx and Engels. Uh, conventional knowledge has always been saying that Marx was a theorist of communism. It's not really true. He just wrote a Communist Manifesto, which became very, very popular. Communist Manifesto is just a manifesto. It's very polemical and rhetorical. But the major work of Marx is really the study of capitalism, Das Kapital. So Marx and Engels studied capitalist development in backward nations. Actually, Marx viewed capitalism as historically technologically progressive system. He was able to produce all these wonders of technology, but he was criticizing the alienation and the inequalities created by that kind of mode of production. So Marx and Engels believe really that capitalism is a historically progressive system. So he's in a sense a modernizer as well. Uh, but then he was also studying how modernity in Europe was created, and he criticized it. He studied it, and he pointed out that that modernity was attained through primitive accumulation and colonialism and imperialism. And of course, there are lots of Marxists also who theorize about imperialism. You know, you have Hilferding, Luxemburg, you have Lenin, um, and all these thinkers. And then the development theorists, uh, Paul Baran and Andre Gunder Frank, they are known as the leading thinkers on dependent theory. Um, so they theorize about the development of underdevelopment. So this is a theory of underdevelopment. Why third world countries are unable to realize their maximum full potential um, for their economy to flourish. So Paul Baran argued that what is decisive is that the economic development in underdeveloped countries is profoundly inimical to the dominant interest in the advanced capitalist countries. So the argument here is that um, the uh, the underdevelopment of the third world is in the interest of the development process of the richer countries, particularly the West. So so they saw a relationship here between the so-called the metropolis and the satellites. You know, the core capitalist countries, and then the peripheral agricultural uh, pre-industrial countries. Um, and there's another theories there in world system theory, Immanuel Wallerstein. Um, so there are three units of analysis in his theory. So there are core countries, periphery countries, and peripheral countries. The core countries are the Western advanced industrial countries, particularly uh, US and Europe, um, regionally Europe, of course. And they also include there in the triad Japan. Um, the peripheral countries are the poor developing world. The semi-periphery are the ones who are um, newly industrializing right now. So they were able to move beyond poverty, um, just like the East Asian countries. In the theory of unequal exchange by Raul Prebisch in Latin America, um, so he studied the unequal relationships in in the world capitalist system. That the Western industrial countries specialize in manufacturing sector, which many of you have mentioned, while the developing world specialize in low value added economic activities. Um, but as you can see, like Marx and Prebisch here would also have their argument about modernization, um, especially Raul Prebisch, who would argue for the importance of industrialization, which Alisa mentioned about the key to Finland's development. Saroj also mentioned about the importance of industrialization. Okay, so there have been theories also who would blame population. They would say that it's a Malthusian argument. You say that, for instance, they would say that the Philippines is poor because there's just too much people there. That the Nordic countries are rich because there are just a few people. But how come the United States with 300 million people, Germany with about 80 or 90 million people? Um, is it really, why are you problematizing population? In the issue about climate change right now, there are still many who argue along the Malthusian argument. They problematize population rather than the production system, and technology, and what kind of technological system we should have in order to sustain, a huge population. Um, and there are also thinkers who talk about the importance of culture. Um, uh, so there are arguments that look at culture as a means and ends of development. Amartya Sen, in a way, in his argument on development as freedom, he actually mentioned that culture is among development's ends and means. For many of us, actually, culture is an expression of the good life. Um, but when you study the relationship between culture and development, you should also be careful about the arrow of causality. Which line uh, the arrow flows. Does the culture cause development, or does development cause culture, or there is a co-evolution in that? There are thinkers who say culture shapes development. There were also theories who say development shapes culture. And there are also theories right now in development economics in particular who see the co-evolution between them. Um, this is just a review, and then um, you can read further on this. Max Weber, in his classic, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, this well-known sociologist. Uh, so he argued that Protestantism, this is based on the Calvinistic ethic, um, has been conducive actually to capitalism, because he argued that man by nature is dominated by the making of money, by the acquisition as the ultimate purpose of his life. And then um, he even quoted the Bible here in Proverbs. Seest thou a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings. So it's part of the argument that in Catholicism, they say that the Catholics um, uh, take seriously the statement that it is easier for a camel uh, to enter through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, something like that. So it's just like glorifying poverty. Um, so the Bavarian or the Protestant ethic is that you have to do good now materially in the real world, because that would also determine uh, your uh, your fate or reception when you are in heaven. Um, okay, and then, as you should know, the Catholic Church, in fact, has been critical of capitalism. The Pope Benedict XVI, he's still alive. He has written a lot about it. He's actually a thinker, very conservative and critical of capitalism. Um, Pope Francis is also critical of capitalism. Yeah. So in his encyclicals, he would uh, be criticizing the economy of exclusion, the idolatry of money. He would criticize the financial system and all. So in particular, these dominant religions have been this Catholic religion is critical of capitalism. But as I know, as you should know also, there are also um, groups within Catholicism who are into prosperity um, gospels, evangelicals and all. Okay. And Islam and capitalism, there have been dominant view that Islam is not conducive to capitalism. But if you look at history, like the work by Maxime Rodinson, that the Muslim Empire, if you look at the history in the Ottoman Empire, in the Middle East, um, the Muslim Empire conformed perfectly actually to Weber's criteria for capitalistic activity. Look at the Middle East right now, and then I would also encourage you to, if you're interested in this topic on the relationship between Islam and capitalism, to look at the work of Ibn Khaldun, from the 14th century. There are so many written by him and about him in political economic thought. And this is some book that these are some books that also theorize about it. Culture Matters by Lawrence Harrison and Samuel Huntington. And there are studies about the relationship between religion and progress. So they say that Protestantism has been far more conducive to modernization than Catholicism. They say the Nordic countries are the champions of progress. In Nordic countries, of course, they say it's Protestant, but largely there are a lot of atheists in this part of the world. So this book also mentioned about Confucianism as conducive to modernization and all. So just look into this. I have summed up the book for you if you're interested in this topic. Okay, in Asia, there's this statement about the Asian values. Why the likes of Malaysia, Singapore, China right now are fast developing because of so-called Asian values. So Asian values are said to be about the acceptance of hierarchy, of authority, and respect for reverence, and then the belief that the government is benevolent. But then it has been criticized because it is actually conceptually false, because there are diversity of cultures in Asia. So you really cannot say Asian values. And then it's also politically suspicious because it's a justification for authoritarianism, that you are making authoritarianism conducive to capitalism. And then they are also blaming this for resulting in the 1997 Asian financial crisis. And then there are also thinkers who argue that it is actually the mode of production that molds and defines people. It's industry. And then there are those who also argue about race and development. Yeah. So the white man's burden, which we already mentioned. And these are the list of those who criticize that kind of view. Yeah. In the United States, for instance, there are arguments about, you just heard it recently from Trump about the so-called Latino traits are incompatible with the Anglo-Protestant values that built the American dream. All this thinking is still very much alive. And then Marx, of course, theories about colonialism, that the modernity of Europe was done through the colonial system. So the colonies secured a market for the budding manufacturers of the monopoly market in Europe. And then they have done it through looting, enslavement, and murder, and all those facts which we have been hearing right now also with the Black Lives Matter movement. And there are also the arguments about the imperial factor. There have been thinkers, particularly Cecil Rhodes. In the UK, there's this Rhodes Scholarship. So he was this minor. He was a proponent and apologist of imperialism. So he argued that the empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialist. And he would explicitly state that we must find new lands from which we can easily obtain raw materials, and at the same time exploit the cheap slave labor that is available from the natives of the colonies. The colonies would also provide a dumping ground for the surplus goods produced in our factories. Um, and then about colonialism has been used actually as a technology and trade and development policy. Historically, if you look at the documents in economic policy, you see how the Africans and the Black people in particular were prevented from developing their own manufacturers. Yeah, here explicitly stated, like from Joshua Gee in 1729 um, for Great Britain. You know, he said here that all Negroes shall be prohibited from weaving either linen or woolen or spinning or combing of wool or working at any manufacture of iron further than making it into pig or bar iron. Indeed, if they set up manufactures and the government afterwards shall be under a necessity of stopping their progress, we must not expect that it will be done with the same ease that now it may. So it's an argument why how industrialization in the manufacturing sector has been a mandatory passage point to development. That the colonies were prevented to specialize in that kind of economic activity, which would be key to making them uh, richer. You know, to make them to make them become a modern industrial economy. Um, I think we only have a contract until 3:45, although I was expecting actually from 2 to 4. Do you have any quick questions? We can continue the discussion tomorrow. Any questions or points you would like to make? Do you have class afterwards? I'm not hearing any response.
We don't.
No class. Okay. What is this question? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, shall we end now or continue? We can continue with the discussion because I know that when I requested the schedule of the course, I was thinking it would be at least 2 hours, not 1.5 hours. But in SISU, as you can see there, a class session is only for 1.5 hours. But in Zoom, you can only set it in 2 hours. So we just have to follow the official SISU determine the class hours, which is 1.5 hours. Okay, we can continue, or would you like to discuss any points here? We will meet again tomorrow. Okay, thank
Maybe
you.
tomorrow. Bon, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So we should now comment on the presentation today and then put our questions for tomorrow's
you
slides,
can.
or
Yeah.
tomorrow's readings, I mean.
Yeah. Ideally, as I mentioned, the question should be before a session. And then the takeaways should be after the session, because the takeaways is about what you remember or from the course, or what basically have you learned from the session. But in practically, as what you have done now, you can just do anything, questions and takeaways. So yeah, we can continue with this discussion tomorrow. And tomorrow we will move to the contemporary development theories, and the remaining discussion that I have set out for today actually has components about the contemporary times. So they are, of course, very much related. Okay, guys, see you tomorrow, and thanks for your time, and thanks for the nice discussion that we had.
Thank you very much.
Thank
See
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.